Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. I am John Wynn Yap, Outreach and Advocacy Manager at California Humanities. I go by he, him, his. Before getting started, and as a means of grounding this virtual conversation to place, I want to acknowledge that I am joining this conversation from Oakland and land which is the traditional and unceded territory of the Chochenyo Ohlone. Through the chat, we invite you to introduce yourselves as well as acknowledge the land you are on. We are also sharing a few resources in the chat that provide more information on the practice of land acknowledgements and also determining the indigenous lands you are on, since we have guests from many parts of the country. All right, so California Humanities, if you're unaware of us, we are the state nonprofit partner to the National Endowment for the Humanities. The Art of Storytelling program celebrates and engages the public in the visual stories across California. Tonight, we are excited to focus on the film Unsettled, Seeking Refuge in America, that was supported by California Humanities to the California Documentary Project Grant Program. The California Documentary Project supports films, podcasts, and interactive media projects that explore critical California subjects and issues, use the humanities to provide context, depth, and perspective, and have the potential to reach and engage broad audiences through multiple means. Together, they help us better understand who we are and where we live. We are honored and humbled to have as our guests Tom Shepard, filmmaker of Unsettled, and Cheyenne Adriano, whose experiences were documented in the film. Our main program will interweave their insights and stories with some clips from the film. After the conversation, we will have dedicated time for questions. Now, let's proceed to the main program. I would like to introduce our moderator, Mina Para Matlon. Mina is the managing director of Imagining America and is also one of the board members of California Humanities. Welcome, Mina.
Thank you, John. And thank you to the rest of California Humanities staff for organizing this event and bringing us here together today. It is my great privilege to get to provide a brief introduction to the film before we move to a film clip, or the trailer. So Unsettled follows 4 individuals, Cheyenne, Mari, Subi, and Junior, who have fled their home countries with hopes of rebuilding their lives in America. Landing in San Francisco, their journeys of resettlement provide a complex and deeply personal look at what it means to leave home and establish a new one. While this is a story of the particular experiences of queer refugees and asylees, the issues raised by the film and the search for safety, stability, and community in America echoes in households and on street corners across the country. A feature-length documentary, Unsettled has been screened at numerous film festivals, including the San Francisco International Film Festival and the Human Rights Film Festival. Recently had its broadcast premiere on the World Channel and is currently available streaming through worldchannel.org and pbs.org. Among its numerous awards and accolades is Best LGBTQ Film at the New York Cinematography Awards, the Grand Jury Award for Best Documentary at Outfest, and the Audience Award for Documentary Feature at the Tel Aviv International LGBT Film Festival. So we are going to watch a trailer from the film. John.
I had to be careful all the time.
They just come and take it from your home, and they kill you.
Same-sex sexual relations are illegal in more than 70 countries.
There was this sense of danger all the time. In Congo, they say gay people don't exist.
In Angola, I could never put a foot out of my house. I would get harassed.
Most gay people in Syria, you'll be targeted from everyone, even your family.
Welcome to America. Welcome home.
San Francisco continues to be one of the most expensive places to live in the country.
Moving from place to place, it's like you are still migrating. homeless.
If the asylum officer finds that they're not eligible for asylum, they're placed in removal proceedings.
It could be weeks, even months before we found an attorney for you guys.
My family's still there, and no matter what they've done to me, they're still my family.
At least here, we're not gonna have people calling us name on the street. I think this don't happen here in America, right?
They're going back. They're going back. I'm telling you, they're going back.
I don't want to have regrets. The best lesson was not being angry. The lesson was to make things happen.
Our brothers and sisters in the Middle East and elsewhere need to know that we stand with them.
After everything that I've been through, I'm still alive, and I'm resilient.
We are not afraid anymore.
Tom and Cheyenne, welcome. What an honor it is to have this conversation with you. We'll start with some introductions. Tom, to you, if you could tell us a bit about yourself and what inspired you to make a film on LGBTQ refugees and asylees.
Thank you, Mina, and thanks California Humanities for including us in this conversation and all the support along the way. Yeah, we started researching the project in 2014. I was doing some volunteer work with a refugee resettlement organization, Jewish Family and Community Services of the East Bay. And at that time, you probably recall, LGBTQ civil rights in the US and many Western countries was sort of barreling forward. We had marriage equality, which was winding its way to the Supreme Court. Not the case in many other regions of the world at that time. We were looking more in Africa and in the Middle East, but you were starting to hear stories of gay men being thrown off of buildings by extremist groups. You were hearing stories of lesbian corrective rape in Africa. And honestly, I didn't know very much about refugees. I couldn't have even told you at that time what the difference was between a refugee and an asylum seeker. And I think most Americans don't know the story. So we wondered if there was an opportunity to, kind of tell a longitudinal story that would humanize kind of the lived experiences of queer refugees and asylum seekers. And it happened that year that Jewish Family and Community Services, who have been doing refugee resettlement work for decades and decades, really, they'd gotten a first substantial grant from the federal government. It was the State Department and the Health and Human Services Department to resettle LGBTQ refugees. So it felt like there was just, kind of stars were aligning in terms of being able to connect with refugees and asylum seekers.
So Cheyenne, bringing you into this conversation, please introduce yourself. And if you could also speak to how you were first connected with Tom and his team.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Cheyenne. I am from Angola. And we met Tom through Melanie Nathan. So we knew Melanie Nathan for a while, and she introduced us to Tom when we first came to the United States. So that's how we met.
So for folks who haven't seen the film, could you just quickly describe who Melanie is?
Sure. Melanie Nathan, she's actually more than a friend, and she's a human rights advocate. And she also helps refugees, she helps them try to resettle them in places. I don't think it's fair for me to actually say what she exactly does, but that's like her area. She's an advocate and she's a human rights advocate. Yeah.
Sure. Mm-hmm. And we'll see her in a bit in our next film clip. So, when you were first approached by Tom and his team, how did you feel about having your story told?
very suspicious. Why? First of all, very suspicious. Why? The question Mari and I had was really, why are you interested in our story? Are you just looking for, like, you know, questions the normal people would ask themselves? Are you like, you want to profit out of our stories? Like, what are you trying to do? And also there was like that, we were worried that the story, you know, would leave USA, and, you know, our families would watch that film and like, what would they think about it? And what will happen to them? Because we come from very, let's say, religious backgrounds. So, and we have like small siblings. So we had also that in the back of our head. So definitely it wasn't like when Tom and Mel told us about the documentary idea, it wasn't like we were, oh, okay, let's go ahead and jump and make a documentary and put our lives out there. It took a time. Even when we started recording, there were days that we really didn't feel like doing it, just because we still had in our heads, like, where's this going? Like, should we really be doing this? So it wasn't an easy process, but, you know, along the way, we got to know Tom better. We actually became friends, and we started building that relationship and trust. And here we are today.
Sure. So where were you in your asylum process when you were first approached? Like, and how long?
I'm sorry, you cut off a little bit.
Where were you in your process, in your asylum process, when you were first approached? And how long had you been in the US at that point?
We were in San Francisco Bay Area. And I believe it took us, wow, I think it was 2 years process. I'm not sure. Was that 2 years, Tom? I'm actually not sure, but it was a long time. I think it was 2 years. We were in San Francisco, and we were not able to work. We had to like work under the table, which it was a risk for us to take, because if we were like, if people found out that we were working under the table, we were at risk of being deported. So that was the process, like being 2 years, like waiting for your asylum to be granted, and, you know, trying to survive at the same time.
So I'm going to follow up a little bit more on that asylum experience, especially after we have our next clip. But I think, you know, with that journey where you're beginning to tell your story now publicly and through and with, you know, Tom and Tom's team, I'm thinking, Tom, more in terms of how you took the narrative approach that you did to the film. And so, you know, Unsettled, it creates a number of narrative tensions. The, you know, persisting image of the US as a land of freedom and opportunity juxtaposed against the lived precarity of so many US residents, which is a major theme in the film. Other themes include crises of unaffordable housing and homelessness that we experience both in the Bay Area, but also across the United States. Cheyenne, your story of the difficulties of obtaining an immigration status and how critical the status is to being able to, you know, get a job and housing, and then other issues that we'll be discussing. And so I guess within the context of all of these different themes embedded in all of these stories, how did the structure of the story reveal itself? How did you decide kind of where to start?
Yeah, I mean, great questions. I think that piece about, you know, San Francisco and California and other cities like San Francisco and the Bay Area as being a kind of promised land for queer people, that's certainly mythology that I metabolized growing up. And I myself had grown up in a pretty conservative town in Colorado. And, you know, in the 90s could kind of flee internally to San Francisco and, you know, find my tribe as a documentary filmmaker, as a gay man. And I think that image of San Francisco, especially being a very immigrant-friendly city traditionally, and certainly kind of queer liberation, is something that a lot of people outside of the country still see. But, you know, try living on a refugee benefit of $350 a month in one of the most expensive cities in the world. And in the case of Cheyenne and Marie, who didn't have any refugee support, they were asylum seekers. So they had the wherewithal to get into the US, had very little support. So I guess the biggest surprise was that some of those issues just about survival and class and race took kind of center stage, and the issues of sexual orientation and gender identity wasn't always the most important issue of the day. So, and I think, you know, just to kind of follow up on what Cheyenne was saying, I think most refugees and asylum seekers are fleeing trauma, if not torture. So the idea of sort of putting cameras in their faces right when they get here and ask them to kind of like retell or regurgitate some of the trauma is really not smart for anyone, but especially for folks who are just trying to get their sea legs. And the other big difference, Mina, is that, you know, the refugee resettlement model in the US has always been kind of based on family. So a family will flee like a war-torn zone of the world, and if they come to the Bay Area, they'll be connected immediately to people from their home country. So if they're from Iraq, you know, maybe they'll, in the East Bay, be connected to mosques or grocery stores or community groups. LGBTQ refugees aren't fleeing with families. They're often fleeing from their own families. And so I think that was the biggest, kind of most heartbreaking thing, meeting folks like Cheyenne and Marie and Subi and Junior, is that the potential for being very isolated when they get to the Bay Area is quite high, and the potential for repetition of trauma as they're kind of moving around and trying to get their toeholds was really great. So it was a process, and in the end, I mean, these films always take, you know, it seems like my average time for finishing a film is, you know, 4 to 5 years, but in this case, I think it might have served the project well to take it very slowly and delicately, and to get to know folks and to get to know Cheyenne and Marie as, you know, as we did. So
how long was that entire process then? It seems that you started filming around 2016, but perhaps earlier.
It was earlier, actually. It was at the end of 2014 when Cheyenne and Marie arrived, and we actually did do a little bit of filming in those weeks and in early 2015. And I had also, as a volunteer, had been working with Junior Mayema, who's from the Congo, and he was a client of the refugee organization. And so I'd gotten to know him actually for a few months before we even had the conversation about filming.
Okay. So you've been filming, you have a sense of the different issues that you're going to be focused on. And I guess, you know, stories about refugees often begin with their lives in their home country, and then the circumstances that lead them to flee, and then they end with their arrival in the adopted nation. And in this case, for Unsettled, you actually really pick up the story once they arrive in the US. That's the construct. So why did you decide to start with these stories at the point of arrival, as opposed to like more limited background story?
Right. I mean, I think part of that was a function of access, and that was the point of access, was the arrival for most of them. And I think a little bit what you were saying about, and what we were talking about before, which is that we understood that maybe some of the backstory would kind of come out more organically over time. And also we didn't want to press them right away to say, you know, can you tell us the most horrific thing that happened to you? And I know that Cheyenne and Marie, as part of preparing for their asylum interview, had to do a lot of practice sessions. And so we knew that they were already going to have to be doing that. And it's like, we didn't want to be one other person that was asking them to do that, particularly in the first months.
So that actually works as a perfect segue into our next clip, where we're going to get a little deeper into that asylum experience. John.
Nobody will go to the police because they're scared. So what you gonna do? You're gonna fear for your life? You're not gonna feel safe to go and report something that is happening to you.
You're gonna need more detail. The asylum person, he's not in your head. Now, a lot of it's here, but they're gonna wanna hear it from you.
I moved in with Marie. Her mother didn't like the situation. She brought some cooked food for us, so we ate. In the middle of the night, we woke up sweating, like with diarrhea, really bad vomiting. And like it was really, we thought we would die because it was really, really bad, really bad.
It was the same day that she said, I wish I would leave you for adoption. I wish you were never born. Yeah, things like that.
So we left off where you talked about not wanting to put a camera in anyone's faces when they're going through this experience, and yeah, obviously that's necessary to capture this story. And so actually my next question is for Cheyenne. In arts and activist spaces, we speak of the power and necessity to lift up untold stories and the liberating power of telling your own story. But the asylum experience can flip this around with this requirement for you to tell the story again and again, traumatic events that you're still processing. So I guess building on some of the earlier questions about telling your story, can you talk about the experience, how that experience has gone for you of telling your story?
It was excruciating. I'm not gonna lie to you. It wasn't easy having to tell your story over and over again and just go through the same trauma over and over again. It's really not easy. There were points that we were just like depressed for days because we were like constantly having to tell our story and like constantly going back to those traumas. So it wasn't easy at all. And I believe it wouldn't be easy to anyone to have to, talk about the trauma. You start feeling not really comfortable, but you start like feeling more open about telling or talking about your traumas and your story with time. It takes a lot of time. Like nowadays we are so like comfortable talking about it. Just, we feel like we like telling our stories. We are like educating people as well. So it have gotten better, but we definitely had a hard time like doing this before. It wasn't easy at all. It wasn't easy. Just watching this clip, it just like made me cringe a little bit. It's like, we went through that. So,
Tom, as a filmmaker, multiple questions of agency arise in presenting someone else's story, and also the steps that you take in order not to be re-traumatizing the participants in your film. Could you tell us maybe some of from like your perspective, some of the issues that arise and the measures that you took in order to not be part of the problem?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good question. I think it was relatively easy for me anyway to connect directly with Cheyenne and Marie, and also they weren't part of an agency, so there wasn't, in terms of our work with refugees, we had to sort of work with folks who were running that program to even connect with refugees. And partly, Cheyenne and Marie were quite successful back in Angola. I mean, both of them are musicians and performers, and actually had quite a following in Luanda, in the capital of Angola. And they were also successful business people. They had were sort of popsicle entrepreneurs with a successful business. So I think a lot of Americans imagine, asylum seekers to be, really uneducated, bedraggled. Actually, it was I'm guessing, and Cheyenne can talk about this better than I can, that had to be a really tough choice, and the stakes must have felt really high to leave a place where they were already doing quite well. But I think because they were in the arts already, we connected a lot about that early on. And both of them are really curious, so they had so many questions about, how do you create the documentary? And we would talk about music, and I would ask them about their performance. So I think it was, getting to just kind of meet them on their own terms and really listen. And I just think, trust, as Cheyenne was saying, trust and rapport sort of follows in that way. And I think they could kind of understand better who I was and what the intentions were behind the project. So, but I have to say there are actually very few queer refugees and asylum seekers, particularly at that time, that were willing to do what they did for the fears that Cheyenne talked about, their own exposure, but also potentially putting their family in harm's way. So like with the benefit of a few years of distance, I'm kind of bowled over by how kind of courageous they were in doing that. And it's a PBS documentary. You don't get paid to be in a film like that. So what is the investment in that? And I kept seeing in all four of them, this desire to, I think, maybe make it better for the next generation of kind of queer dislocated people. And you see that in all the ways that they, sort of step forward with their story. So that to me is really kind of powerful ownership and agency. Yeah.
Cheyenne, I see you nodding. Did you want to add on to any of that? I know Tom covered a lot of grounds.
Yeah, he did. Just to echoing what Tom was saying. Yeah, we don't get paid for doing the documentary. And I do have a lot of people asking us, so why did you do that? You're not even getting paid for it. So there are things in life that it's not all about the money. Like, we feel so grateful and proud of ourselves for having, to go ahead and finish the documentary, because we look back now and we think, wow, you know what? This is going to be good, not just for America, but like for everyone around the world. This is a golden piece of documentary. This can like teach a lot of people, because specifically here in America, like most of Americans have no idea what is the difference between asylum seeker and refugee. And it's 2020 and living in that mindset that we come to this country to steal jobs or steal whatever people have in their minds. Watching this documentary, I feel like people will sit down and like critical think, hey, you know what? We really didn't know anything. So let me go ahead and educate myself a little bit more. Yeah.
And let me just add one thing, Mina. You obviously can't pay participants of a public television documentary, but now that the film is done, and Cheyenne and Marie and Junior and Subi have all been like incredible faces of the film and have traveled to film festivals. One festival that was just amazing is Cheyenne and Marie came out to Colorado Springs, which is where I am now, my hometown, to the Rocky Mountain Women's Film Festival. And we didn't tell the audience of 600 people that they were there. And then at the last minute, they sort of came out, and it was just amazing. And Cheyenne and Marie do have a GoFund campaign now for the music that they're recording. And Junior also has a GoFund campaign to support his housing and what he's doing now. We can talk about that later. And Subi started an organization called Spectra Project. So people now can very much support their efforts and what they're doing. And we really encourage folks to learn more about those efforts.
So hold that thought, because we will turn to next steps and ways to support. I'm told that we need to move to our next clip. And so we'll pick this conversation up in a second.
So this page is very important. They talk about all public housing. So here's a phone number to call us and email to answershud.gov.
I'm going to contact them.
Yeah, just ask you really urgent. You need an apartment.
You will not sleep on the street. God will not do it.
Be careful.
So this is my husband, Jack, and you have my name, Betsy.
Yeah.
I could come up and rearrange the space. Do that before.
Next month I will be moving again to another place. So it's like you are just in process of moving from place to place. It's like you are still migrating, you are still traveling. And
many of our refugees, they need extra time to become acclimated. In Junior's case, the way he looks and presents himself, there's prejudice that he's fighting, and he's had PTSD issues. He has expressed that he recognizes he drinks and he shouldn't drink.
So, while all of the storylines cover challenges refugees and asylees face in resettling in America, this might be most evident in Junior's story in many ways. And so I guess starting with you, Tom, following up on my previous question, when you're seeing Cheyenne, Marie, Subi Jr. Struggle with issues of housing and isolation and the general precarity of attaining asylum, so that are not paid. So Cheyenne, while I appreciate your spirit of wanting to get involved and tell the story and how important and powerful that is, at the same time, when you're trying to find housing, you know, and you're spending all this time on a film, Tom, from your side, how did your team address this during the filmmaking and in the storytelling process? When Junior has all his luggage out on the sidewalk and you're filming that, the question in my mind is, what happens when you turn the cameras off?
Yeah, and I have to say, like, Junior taught me so much about this term internal displacement, that folks who, like in Junior's case, he's originally from the Congo and then migrated across the continent of Africa, went to Cape Town, was in Cape Town, South Africa for many, you know, a couple of years, and then ultimately comes to San Francisco with this notion of kind of refugee resettlement. And again, what we talked about earlier, that there's, you know, San Francisco is going to be this safe harbor. And to see someone then still be in motion so much, couch surfing, as the card says, Junior moved 10 times in the first year. So it was completely heartbreaking and really kind of smashed my sort of conceptions of what it means to be sort of finding refuge. But in terms of the questions, it's really hard. And Jen Gilliman, my co-producer, we had a number of conversations with our supervising producers at Independent Television Service at ITVS about this very question, because neither she nor I are the, you know, kind of people to just like, oh, someone's suffering, turn the cameras on and watch. So while we couldn't, you know, provide direct funding, like compensation for being in the documentary, there were certainly ways that we and our networks of friends and increasingly people around us who knew about them could support. And that was largely because of the volunteers that were helping, like Melanie Nathan that Cheyenne mentioned, Galen Workman, the man that you just saw in the clip, and others who were putting up crowdsourcing campaigns, who were getting the word out. So I can tell you that the people very close to us were quite sensitive to what the needs were and were trying to do all that they could. But it's, you know, it's a tricky issue. Documentary film making is part journalism and it's part filmmaking. And so, you know, I don't think there's one formula. I don't think there's one answer to your question, Mina. Mina, I think you might be muted there.
Honestly, the pleasures of Zoom. So I wanted to focus here now to talk about another tension in the film that's present but not explicitly covered within the film, but was present in that clip. And so this is whiteness. You know, I'm stating the obvious in making the observation that virtually all of the sponsors and helpers in Unsettled are white, or at least white presenting. And this is the system of support that appears to be offered to a significantly younger group of BIPOC individuals. Can you talk about why this is, or at least appears to be the case in the film? And now you're muted.
Now I'm muted, all right. So yeah, and I would love to hear from Cheyenne. And I just am seeing text from the folks at California Humanities that Junior has joined us. So I don't know if it's possible to funnel him in, but he can also speak for this too. But yeah, I think one of the questions when we started is who is going to step forward, and that question about LGBTQ refugees who are often left sort of out of that diaspora and out of that kind of traditional model of support and resettlement. The people that, at least at that time, and I would say it was very nascent. I mean, you know, people were creating little network trees of, you know, who might have an extra bedroom and who could, you know, and so, and largely that was through religious organizations. And I guess that's not a shocker, because most refugee resettlement has often been connected to religious denominations. But the Guardian Group, which is part of the Unitarian Church, had a network of maybe 15 to 20 people. And most of those people were white folks in their 70s and 80s who were really connecting deeply to Junior's story and to Subi's story. And I thought that was sort of interesting, almost a kind of unexpected alliance. And then it made me think that some of those folks had maybe experienced homophobia back in the 50s almost a kind of McCarthy level persecution that young folks, particularly young queer folks in the Bay Area, might not, really appreciate. So absolutely, race is a part of these stories in the film, and how folks are being sort of perceived, and sort of raises a larger question of who is welcome in the queer community in the year 2020, when the character of the Bay Area has changed quite dramatically and economically. So, but yeah, that's some initial thinking on that.
And certainly, if Junior is here, I would love to hear from them on this topic, because I feel like it particularly surfaces within Junior's story as presented, and the racial and economic differences that you said kind of rose to the top when you're building like the arc of the story, becomes another structural hurdle that they're facing, in addition to homelessness and the immigration system and so forth. And I could, throughout the film, despite the good intentions of the helpers, you can also see the clear limits in how they can support, the resettlement experiences of folks like Junior and Cheyenne. So to Cheyenne and or Junior, if you're on here, could you tell us about both maybe your connections with each other as possible building a support system, but also any other sources of support that you tapped, particularly that might be more available for queer communities of color?
Let me see. That is a good question. Because just like Tom said, like the people who really got together to help were people from churches, right, and the small organizations. So that is a good question. I don't have like a specific place or organization that I could say, okay, if they come here, this is the place they can go. Because Maria and I, and you would have think that coming to San Francisco, right, we would be embraced by the LGBTQ community, but we actually suffered more xenophobia and racism inside the LGBTQ community. And I tell these people till today, and they're like, wait, how is it possible? But that was our experience. I don't know, maybe some people had different, but that was our experience. So if it happened different, I would say, okay, if a refugee or LGBT or asylum person comes to the United States, they will be welcome in the LGBTQ community and they will just be embraced and helped 100%. But I cannot say that because I had a different experience. So I don't have like a specific point where I can say, hey, this is where you can go. We were helped by so many different type of people. And just like Tom said, the people who really helped us were people like at a certain age, like 50, 60, they really came together and they were there to help. And like the youngest part of the community and people were not present, if that makes sense. Yeah. So it wouldn't be fair for me to, tell people, hey, if you come here, this is where you can go. We had a completely different experience. And there are times where we felt alone, hey, we're not really part of this community here. So, yeah.
Junior, I see you. Did you want to add on? We're talking about systems of support, especially within, queer communities of color, younger communities, like other places where, in theory, you should find more common ground.
Yeah, so
welcome.
Yeah, thank you. What I want to say is just, we need a community, a community of people, really. It's so important, especially for LGBT asylum seekers and refugees. We come here alone. We don't come here with family. Like Tom said, we're actually fleeing for our family. I remember recently my own sister, she was just like insulting me because something happened recently and she was telling me I should die and she was telling me so many things. So we're fleeing for our family. So we need the support here. And then like for people who come here, there's already huge support for the paperwork. Like if somebody's coming for asylum or refugee status, people who come for refugee, which is no longer happening since Trump became president. There's no even refugee coming in anymore. But asylum seekers are still managing to come to student visa. We need more support, when it comes to housing, employment, and especially housing, because without a roof over your head, it's very hard. That's what I've been going through since I've been here. And then there's employment. Above of that, there's also like community, finding people who can just be there for you, like people who can be there to support you emotionally, just be as a friend who can just listen to you, you can rely on calling, because it's, I know it's very hard at this type of COVID-19, a lot of people are trying to shelter in place, but that does not exclude things like Zooms or, or Facebook Live, or just being there for people, it's very, very important. But most of all is, like in my case, Junior, it has been a roof over my head. Just to work with other people who know how to go about the paperwork, what should be done so that people can be quickly. As Tom said, that the refugee resettlement process, it's already, before you get here, they already get you a housing, and as you get here, most of refugees, they come with their family. So they have the support, they can be able to settle down and quickly become self-sufficient. But in our case, we come here alone, and then you come to a very expensive city like San Francisco, where I am right now, and then you have the housing, which is like, to just rent a room is $3,000. It's really, really expensive. Mm-hmm. I've been trying to leave San Francisco, but I don't know how I'm gonna do that. But I've been trying to do that because I don't know if I'm gonna continue being here. It's just so expensive, and there's not so much support that I'm getting. I'm trying to reach out to friends, to people that I know. I only know one person since I've been here who is very close to me. Galen who's been a volunteer, who's been really helpful, he told me my birthday is next week. He told me I'm gonna give you a great gift for your birthday. So he's been there throughout, he's been carrying my suitcase, but there's not so much he can do because he has a small house with him and his partner. There's not much they can do, but everybody is trying to help. But it cannot only be Galen, it cannot only be a few people. San Francisco has a big, big LGBT community that can get involved as well. So I just want more support from people, more support from people, our LGBT people, our straight allies, because we have straight people who have been really helpful. They've helped me my entire life in South Africa. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Junior. I think you covered a whole bunch of my different questions that we're going to get to, that lived experience of our structures of inequality in America, and particularly within the context of newcomers. So I know we have one more clip, and we're going to open it up to questions shortly. So perhaps, John, the final clip.
It's like really scary feeling like if you're not gonna fit well with the society. I don't know, I feel a little bit stressed about the cultures.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
What everybody feels as
you
an
just
Iraqi.
landed. Yeah, I think that you're in a better position than many other people because of your language, your skills.
Okay. All right. Now just Suvi. Look at me. Look at me. Look at me.
Thank you so much.
When I left home, it felt really good at first. It feels much safer. But sometimes when I wake up, I just get the same feeling. you're here, you're alone, and all the things that you lived with and you left behind will stay with you, but you cannot go back no matter how much you miss them.
You know, our complicated relationships with home and family and what is left behind. You know, throughout the film, Cheyenne, Junior, Subi, all of your different experiences as you reflect on home and that process of leaving, I kind of want to end with some questions on that. There's a poem called Farewell by a Kashmiri American poet, Aga Ali, that reads, you know, I'm everything you lost, you won't forgive me. My memory keeps getting in the way of your history. And when I saw this part of the film with Subi, I was reflecting back, Cheyenne, to early in the film, where you say that being kicked out by the people you most loved and you trust, you know, I had this anger in my heart. And so my question for you is, now that you've been away from Angola for a number of years, where are you now and how you're processing what has been left behind? And the same question to Junior.
Okay, can you guys hear me now? Okay, awesome. So first of all, it was not easy to leave everything behind. Our business, everything that we built back then, and most importantly, our family, no matter what was going on between us, those are still our family. So that was not easy at all. And of course, I was still very hurt because those were my parents, right? And you kicked me out of the house because I'm being myself, let's say like that. So of course, I was carrying that anger with me for a long time, and it took a while for me to be at peace with myself, because I figured out and I found out that I actually need to work on myself. So I have to work on myself first so I can then forgive my parents, right? Because I cannot just look from my end. I understand now that my parents grew up in a completely different type of society. You know, you can do this, you can do that, you have to have children, you have to do that, you have to do that. So their mentality is super different. And I still believe today that it's gonna take them time to actually fully understand and accept me the way I am. We talk today, thank God, but there's still that a little bit of blockage. I can't really tell them, hey, by the way, me and my wife, we did this today, because it doesn't come out natural. It's not comfortable yet. But I chose to understand their side and be at peace with myself and work on myself. So I'm okay now. I'm really okay. I'm okay with it. I don't carry that anger. It was just hurting me. So I found that out. And it took me a lot of work to understand that and to come into this phase in my life where I'm just working more on myself, you know, while rebuilding my relationship with my parents and giving them time, you know, to understand this, because I have to give them time. I cannot force them to understand or accept this. You know, I'm still they daughter, they love me, I know that, but there's just this, I'm gay, and we're also gonna give them time to come around, I guess. But I'm good, I'm at peace. I can say that. I can proudly say that today. I'm at peace.
So Junior, did you want to share? You're muted.
You're on mute.
Oh, I want to talk something about my mom that I did not understand before. Actually, I was the last one in the family. So if there was somebody that my mom loved so much among all of her children, was me, Junior. If I leave the house, I go somewhere, my mom will be calling me, where are you? Come back. She just wanted me to be close to her. So when she found out that I was gay, it was like, it shocked her so much. So she was trying to figure out, what should I do? Because if I leave him out there, they're going to hurt him. And I'm not gonna take the pen. Maybe I should just do it myself. So my mom she just really loved me. Even my sister told me when my mom was dying, as she was breathing her last breath, she was mentioning my name, Junior, 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 my child, you're far away, you're alone. You know, she was trying to protect me from the world. And when I was in South Africa, I was thinking, because I was not talking, she called me actually like 2 hours to just tell me about the word of God and everything. I was gonna go to hell because she was a pastor, until she was not calling me anymore. From 2000, I went to South Africa in 2010. I left in 2014 to come to America. And as soon as she heard that I'm in America, she started calling me again, and she started telling me how much she loved me and how much she wanted me to have a good life. We resumed talking, everything was fine until she died. So I don't think, I think it's about the culture, as Cheyenne said. She was born in a culture where homosexuality is viewed as something that is wrong. But if she was like born in America, I think she could have gone to, she could have been part of PFLAG group or some organization like this, you know, that is there for LGBT parents. You know, she could have learned so much about how to love your children, you know?
So I have a couple questions for the chat, mainly for you, Tom. How did you achieve a balance between telling the 3 separate stories? So you did a brilliant job of balancing the stories, but I would love to hear about the process you went through selecting your subjects or your participants and how it composed the story in the final creating the balance of the 3.
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think as to the extent possible in one film, we wanted to show that there are really distinct differences between refugees and asylum seekers. So we didn't want to just show the refugee journey. And also, it was really important for us to know the stories of women. As hard as it is for gay men to flee, and you see that in the film, it's doubly hard for women. In many of the cultures, they're expected to get permission from a father, an uncle, a husband to be able to leave. And so I think we were pretty awed by not only the fact that Cheyenne and Marie could create this loving relationship in Angola, but then when things got so bad that they had the wherewithal to figure out the systems, like how to navigate the bureaucratic systems to get to the US. So I think that, that was important. But a lot of it was also a function of who was stepping forward. And at that time, as I mentioned before, there were very few queer refugees or asylum seekers who were willing to participate in a film like this. But it certainly was a challenge in the edit room because those, in some ways, I think the film is stronger because the storylines are so very different. But the challenge, of course, is to make it feel like it's all of one world. And I can't say enough about our amazing editor, Ava Bjetsky, and our consulting editor, Jim Klein, who really helped us kind of go through the material and really see where the important intersecting points were and how we could kind of preserve and honor each of the stories and yet still have them feel like they're in the same movie.
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you, and Cheyenne and Junior. I know we are running out of time. And so, I wanted to thank all of you for your continual process of sharing your stories. It's important. You empower us and make this country better when you share the story and share your courage with us. So thank you both for being here. And I am going to turn it back over to John, but Junior, is a privilege to have you join us. And Cheyenne, you know, both of you, please share the GoFund campaigns you have with folks online so we can support you and continue to follow you.
All right, thanks, Mina. Thank you to you, obviously, and also thank you to Cheyenne and Junior and Tom for being here and being so honest and being brave to come here and share your stories again with us. Thanks to all of the California Humanities staff that have been working on this event, especially Kirsten and John Lightfoot, who co-coordinated this event and have been working backstage throughout our program tonight. Thanks also to Renee for helping us with the technology and Christiana for building our wonderful audience. Thank you to the audience for joining us tonight. I appreciate you for listening and being attentive and sharing good thoughts or emotion or good vibes. The video of this event will be posted on our YouTube channel in the coming days. And as of today, you can still watch the film on World Channel's webpage, as Mina had mentioned. And we will be providing more online events like this, and we would love your feedback about tonight. Please take a moment to let us know how it went for you. I'll be sharing the link in the chat. And while this is the official close to our event, we will keep the room open for any virtual mingling, so we will open the chat room. And thanks again, and have a wonderful night.